Welcome to Wild Cowboy Tales. Out in the scorched lands where dust is gold and blood is cheaper than whiskey, a man runs not from the law, but from the man he used to be. But the desert has a funny way about it. It always brings you exactly what you're trying to bury. This is the story of an outlaw and a warrior, two lone souls thrown together by the cruelty of fate, only to discover that the only way to survive is to stand together. The desert was a forge. It baked a man, burned away the soft parts, and left only what was hard, sharp, and dangerous. Cole Dawson had lived in that forge for 8 years. He'd come here to die, but the desert, in its infinite cruelty, had refused him. Instead, it had hammered him into something that was no longer quite human, a creature of rock, sand, and bitter memory. His homestead was a fortress against the world. A simple adobe cabin tucked into the maw of a box canyon, with a trickle of a spring that wept life and a clear view of the endless, shimmering wasteland. Here, he had only 3 companions: the cold peacemaker that rode low on his hip, the Winchester rifle that was never out of arm's reach, and the silence. The silence was the most loyal companion. It asked no questions about the ghosts that whispered his name on the wind, nor did it judge the faint, star-shaped scar on the back of his right-hand brand of the Black Creek Bunch, a permanent reminder of blood and betrayal. Cole was not a part of that world anymore. He was a phantom, a rumor told around campfires. They said he'd faced down 6 rangers alone in the San Mateo Pass. They said he'd robbed an army payroll train without firing a shot. They said a lot of things, but no one knew the truth, that he was tired of the blood, tired of the life where every sunrise was a maybe. His solitude was broken 4 times a year, when his supplies ran thin. The ride to the town of Redemption was a necessary evil. Redemption was an ironically named place, a festering collection of clapboard buildings that erupted from the desert floor like poison mushrooms. It had no church, but 5 saloons. It had no school, but a sheriff's office with a near-permanent help-wanted sign. It was a place where justice was sold to the highest bidder, and a man's life was worth less than a good bottle of rye. Cole rode into town with his face hidden behind a dust-caked bandana and the brim of his hat pulled low. He moved with the cold caution of a wolf entering a sheep pen, his ice blue eyes scanning every alley, every rooftop. He tied his horse outside Jedediah's general store, a place run by a man who knew the value of keeping his mouth shut. Cole would give Jedediah a list and a pouch of gold dust. In return, Jedediah would leave the crates and sacks behind the store at dusk. No questions, no conversation. But today, something was different. The air in town was thick with a foul, electric excitement. Clusters of men were gathered in the central plaza, their faces eager and greedy. Cole could hear the grating voice of an auctioneer, slick and oily. Cole's first instinct was to ignore it. Other people's trouble wasn't his. That was the first rule of survival. Then he heard a word that made his blood run cold: Apache. Against his better judgment, he found himself drifting toward the crowd. He stayed at the back, a tall, silent shadow, and watched. On a makeshift stage, next to the sweating auctioneer, stood a woman. She was not a girl. She was a woman, perhaps 25, and she stood as straight and proud as a desert yucca. Her hair was the color of a raven's wing, braided neatly. Her skin was the copper of baked earth. She wore a simple buckskin dress, torn and filthy, but she wore it as if it were a queen's robe. Her hands were bound in front of her, but she showed no fear. Her eyes, as dark and deep as the night sky, swept over the crowd with a cool, simmering contempt. She was not a cornered animal. She was a mountain lion in a cage, measuring each bar, looking for a weakness. A rare prize, gentlemen, the auctioneer bellowed, his yellowed teeth flashing. The last of her people from these parts. Captured in the Dragon Mountains, full-blooded and untamed. Think of it, a biddable servant for the house, or perhaps something warmer for those cold desert nights. A wave of crude laughter rippled through the crowd. The Menmeners, cowboys, hard-faced drifters stared at her like buzzards eyeing a kill. Cole felt a familiar, hot surge of anger in his gut. It was the very thing he'd come to the desert to bury. The thing that had cost him everything. He'd seen this before. Not an auction, but the same casual cruelty. The stripping away of a person's humanity, turning them into an object. It brought back a memory of Black Creek, of the way the men had laughed when he forced the memory down, a physical effort, like swallowing bile. "We'll start the bidding at $50. He'll give me 50 for this little dessert flower. A corpulent miner with a food-stained beard raised a hand. 50. 60, a weary cattleman shouted. The price climbed quickly. 70. 80. $100. Cole stood motionless, a war raging inside him. This is not your business. You have a rule. Don't get involved. Getting involved gets you killed. He had fled this world, its violence and its impossible choices. The Apache woman, Ayana, as he would later learn her name was, never once looked down. Her eyes met his across the sea of leering faces. There was no plea in them, no cry for help. Just an unquenchable fire, a silent challenge. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was daring him to look away, to be just another one of these craven men. $200, a voice cut in. It was Silas Kane, Vulture Kane, a man with the face of a raptor and a soul to match. Kane was a purveyor of anything that turned a profit, be it guns, whiskey, or human flesh. He had been part of the Black Creek Bunch before Cole's departure. He looked at the woman with a proprietary smirk that made Cole's hand itch for his gun. Kane wouldn't keep her for himself. He'd sell her to the army as a scout, or worse, to a brothel in Sonora. To him, she was just another piece of merchandise. Something inside Cole snapped. 8 years of denial, 8 years of running, all of it dissolved in a single, white-hot moment of rage. He had tried to become a ghost, but he could not stand by and let this happen. Maybe some small piece of the man he had been, the man who had believed in something, anything was still alive. 250, a low, gravelly voice said from the back of the crowd. Every head turned. A hush fell over the plaza as they stared at the tall stranger, the one nobody really knew but everyone instinctively feared. The auctioneer squinted. 250 from the stranger. You got the coin to back that up, mister. Cole said nothing. He simply pulled back the lapel of his duster, revealing the gleaming double-eagle gold coins sewn into the lining. Kane turned, his smirk gone, replaced by a scowl. Dawson, he hissed, the name a curse on his lips. I thought you were dead. You've been disappointed, Cole said, his voice flat. Hate flickered in Kane's eyes. 300, 400, Cole said, without a moment's hesitation. It was almost everything he had. A murmur went through the crowd. This was no longer an auction. It was a showdown. Kane stared at Cole, weighing him. He knew Cole's reputation. He knew that to push this now meant a gunfight later. And Kane was a businessman, not a fool. He shrugged, a gesture of false nonchalance. She ain't worth a dance with a ghost. She's all yours. The auctioneer, seeing that no one else was about to challenge the terrifying stranger, quickly brought the proceedings to a close. $400. Sold to the gentleman at the back. Cole moved forward, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. He tossed a heavy leather pouch onto the stage. He didn't look at the auctioneer. His eyes were fixed on the woman. He drew his Bowie knife and, in one clean motion, sliced through her bonds. For a moment, they stood facing each other. He expected a nod, a silent acknowledgement of thanks. Instead, the instant her hands were free, she moved. She was a blur, fast as a striking sidewinder, snatching the heavy knife from his grasp and pressing its point to his throat. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Cole didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just looked into her eyes, which were now inches from his, blazing with a fierce, defiant inferno. I am not owned, she said, her voice low and raspy, but clear as a bell. Each word was a sharpened stone. Cole felt a slow, dangerous smile touch his lips, a smile that hadn't shown itself in years. It wasn't a smile of humor. It was a smile of recognition. The dessert hadn't just forged him. It had forged her, too. I know, he said, his voice a low rumble. That's why I bought you. The tension in that moment was a physical thing, a drawn bowstring humming with deadly potential. The tip of Cole's own knife rested against his skin, a cold promise held by a woman who looked ready to keep it. The crowd held its breath, expecting a bloody conclusion to the day's entertainment. Cole didn't move. He kept his hands open and away from his body, his gaze locked with hers. He saw the fury in her eyes, but underneath it, he saw something else, the desperate, cornered ferocity of a creature that has known nothing but cages. He had just paid $400 to take her out of one, only to find she saw him as another. The name's Cole, he said, his voice still low and calm. And that's my favorite knife. I'd appreciate getting it back without it passing through my throat first. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face for a lie, for the trick she was certain was coming. She was a whirlwind of suspicion and pride, coiled to strike at the first sign of threat. But Cole's expression held no malice, no lust, only a strange, weary patience. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the knife. She did not hand it back to him. Instead, she reversed her grip, holding it like a weapon she was born to wield, and took a half-step back, creating a space of her own. She was free of her bonds, but now she was a prisoner of the man who had freed her, surrounded by a town full of enemies. "Now what?" she asked, her voice a challenge. "Now," Cole said, turning his back on her to face the stunned crowd, "we leave." He scanned the faces, his icy gaze daring anyone to make a move. Silas Kane was gone, having slipped away, but the rest of the mob still lingered, their eyes filled with thwarted desire and resentment. "The show's over." He gestured with his head towards his horse. "My horse is over there. You can ride, or you can stay here and see how long your luck holds with this lot." She glanced at the crowd, at the hungry, predatory looks. She understood her choices perfectly, a known danger versus an unknown one. With a stiff, proud posture, she walked toward his horse, still clutching the knife. She moved with a fluid grace, a ghost of the wild places she came from. Cole gathered the reins, his eyes never leaving the crowd until they were mounted, Iona sitting stiffly behind him, the knife still held ready. He could feel the rigid tension in her body, the searing heat of her glare on his back. They rode out of Redemption in a cloud of dust and simmering silence, leaving the town and its sordid affairs behind them. The ride to his homestead was a long, silent trial. The sun beat down, and the desert stretched out before them, a vast, indifferent canvas. Cole did not speak. He knew that words would be useless now. He had trespassed, however well-intentioned, on the fiercely guarded territory of her life. Trust, he knew, wasn't something you could buy for $400. It had to be earned, and he had a feeling the price would be much higher. When they arrived at the canyon, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brutal shades of orange and purple. Iona slid off the horse before it had even stopped, landing lightly on her feet. She stood and surveyed the place, her eyes taking in the small adobe cabin, the meager corral, the towering canyon walls that enclosed the small pocket of life like a stone hand. Cole saw her expression tighten. To him, this was a sanctuary. To her, it was just a smaller cage. "You'll be safe here," he said, breaking the silence as he unsaddled the horse. She gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Safe? I am Apache. There is no safe in the white man's world." He didn't have an answer for that. He led the horse to the trough, then began unloading the supplies Jedediah had left. Iona watched his every move, her posture wary, her hand never straying far from the knife she had tucked into the waistband of her tattered dress. She was a sentinel, guarding the last bastion of her own sovereignty. Inside, the cabin was Spartan. A cot, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and shelves stocked with the bare necessities. It was the home of a man who did not live, but merely existed. Cole lit a lantern, casting flickering shadows across the small space. "There's water in the barrel," he said, gesturing with his head. "Food on the shelves. The cot is yours. I'll take the floor." She said nothing, just watched him with those unnervingly dark eyes. He felt like an insect under glass. He was used to being watched by men who wanted to kill him. This was different. This was judgment. He busied himself preparing a simple meal, jerked venison and beans heated over the fire. He set a plate on the table for her. She didn't move. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice cutting through the quiet crackle of the fire. Cole looked up from his own plate. He met her gaze directly. "Nothing," he said. She clearly didn't believe him. "You paid $400 for nothing." "I paid $400 so Silas Kane wouldn't get his hands on you," he replied, his voice flat. "I've seen what men like him do. I wasn't going to see it again. Eat. You'll need your strength." He turned back to his food, a clear signal that the conversation was over. He ate in silence, acutely aware of her standing there, a pillar of defiant mistrust. After a long while, she moved. She didn't go to the table. She took a piece of jerky from an open sack and a handful of dried corn from another, then retreated to the farthest, darkest corner of the cabin. She sat with her back to the wall, like a wolf in its den, and ate her meal, the knife resting on her lap. The days that followed fell into a tense and spoken routine. Cole went about his course, tending to his horse, reinforcing the corral, checking his traps in the high canyon. He never approached her, never tried to force a conversation. He gave her space, an ocean of it. He left food and water where she could get them. He treated her not as a prisoner or a guest, but as a force of nature he had unwillingly brought into his home, like a thunderstorm or a flash flood. Ayanna, for her part, was a silent, watchful presence. She spent hours exploring the confines of the small canyon, learning its paths, its hiding places. She moved with a silent, purposeful grace. Cole would catch glimpses of her on the high ridges, a solitary figure etched against the sky, staring out at the vast desert that had once been her people's home. She was mapping her cage, looking for a way out. He found her one afternoon by the spring, trying to stitch the torn buckskin of her dress with a sharp piece of bone and a thread of her own hair. It was a slow, frustrating task. Without a word, Cole went into the cabin and returned with a small leather pouch. He opened it and offered it to her. Inside were steel needles, a thimble, and spools of waxed linen thread. She looked from the pouch to his face, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. It was a simple gift, an act of kindness, and that made it more dangerous than any threat. A threat she could understand. Kindness was a currency she didn't recognize. After a long moment, she took a single needle and a length of thread, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. She didn't say thank you. But later that evening, her dress was neatly mended. A week passed. The silence between them was no longer hostile, but it was not comfortable either. It was a wary truce, a fragile thing held together by unspoken rules. The first crack in that truce came one night during a storm. A fierce desert squall descended on the canyon, the wind howling like a banshee and rain lashing against the adobe walls. Cole was woken by a sound that wasn't the storm. It was a soft, choked cry from the cot. He rose and moved quietly to the fireplace, adding a log to the dying embers. In the renewed flicker of light, he saw her. She was asleep, but caught in a nightmare. Her body was rigid, her face a mask of anguish. She was murmuring in her own tongue, the words sharp and pained. Cole stood there, a helpless giant. He knew about nightmares. His own were filled with gunfire, the faces of dead men, and the ghost of a woman he had failed to protect. He understood this language of the night. He didn't wake her. Instead, he sat in the chair by the fire, took out his whetstone and his bowie knife, one she had taken and later left on the table without a word, and began to sharpen the blade. The rhythmic, scraping sound of steel on stone was a steady, constant presence in the storm-tossed cabin. It was not a comforting sound, but it was a real one, something to anchor the mind against the ghosts of the past. He sat there for hours, a silent vigil, the sound of his work a shield against the terrors of the night. When the storm passed and the first light of dawn crept into the cabin, she was quiet, her breathing deep and even. Later that morning, she approached him as he was cleaning his rifle. "You speak the language of my people," she said. It wasn't a question. Cole stopped his work. He looked at her, surprised. "A few words. Not much. Picked them up a long time ago." He didn't elaborate. "Last night," she said, her gaze direct. "You heard." He nodded slowly. "I heard." He expected her to retreat, for the wall of her pride to go up again, shamed by a moment of weakness he had witnessed. Instead, she asked a question. Why? It was a simple word, but it held the weight of everything that had happened. "Why did you buy me? Why did you not harm me? Why do you treat me like a person when no one else has?" Cole set his rifle down. He looked out the cabin door at the rain-washed desert. "They're clean and sharp. I used to ride with a man," he said, his voice a low rasp thick with memory. "His name was Jacob. He was better than the rest of us. He fell in love with a Comanche girl. The others in the bunch, they saw her the same way those men in town saw you. As a thing. One night, he stopped, the muscles in his jaw working. The star-shaped scar on his hand seemed to burn. I wasn't there to stop it. I was too late. I buried them both the next morning." He looked back at her. The ice in his eyes had melted, just for a moment, revealing a chasm of old pain. "When I saw you on that stage, I saw her. I couldn't be too late again." He had given her a piece of his past, a shard of the broken man he was. It was a bigger risk than facing down a dozen gunslingers. Ayanna was silent for a long time. She looked at the scar on his hand, and for the first time, her expression was not one of suspicion or defiance, but of a deep, sorrowful understanding. She had her own ghosts. She recognized their shape in his eyes. "My name is Ayanna," she said softly. "I'm Cole," he replied. It wasn't a friendship. It wasn't an alliance. But it was a beginning. The first stone in a foundation of trust, laid in the shared soil of their haunted pasts. The cage of kindness had begun to feel a little less like a cage, and a little more like a shelter. But they both knew the world, and men like Silas Kane, were still out there, just beyond the canyon walls. And shelter, in the desert, was always temporary. The shared confidence by the fire was a fragile dawn, threatening to be burned away by the harsh light of day. Trust, Cole knew, wasn't built on a single story. It was built on actions, on the quiet rhythm of shared existence. The dynamic in the small canyon began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The invisible lines that had divided the small space began to blur. Ayanna was no longer just a watchful presence. She began to inhabit the canyon as if it were her own. Cole would rise at dawn to find her already gone, only to see her later on the high cliffs, moving with an agility that made him, a man completely at home in the wilderness, feel clumsy. She was reading the land, learning its secrets. She would return with her hands full of bitter roots he knew could be boiled for medicine, the leaves of a plant that could be crushed into a poultice for snakebite, a handful of sweet, wild berries found in a shaded crevice he had never known existed. She wasn't his prisoner, she was a partner in survival, whether she admitted it or not. One afternoon, he watched from the cabin door as she worked. She had found a straight, supple branch of mesquite and was painstakingly shaping it with a sharp piece of flint. For days, she worked on it, along with a bundle of straight, feathered shafts. She was making a bow and arrows. She was arming herself. Cole felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of him, the part that still felt responsible for her, was relieved. The other, more honest part, was humbled. She was not waiting for him to protect her. She was a warrior preparing for a war she knew was coming. He, in turn, decided to offer a weapon of his own world. He took the Winchester rifle from its pegs on the wall and walked out to where she was testing the tension on her new bowstring. "A bow is quiet," he said, his voice startling her. "But it only kills one man at a time. And it won't stop a bullet." She looked at the rifle in his hands, her expression unreadable. To her people, the fire stick was a symbol of destruction, the tool of their displacement. "I will not be the one holding it," she said, her voice laced with old animosity. "Maybe not," Cole conceded, "but it's better to know your enemy's weapon, to know its strengths, its weaknesses." He held the rifle out to her, "But first, knowing how to use it doesn't make you one of them. It just makes you harder to kill." She stared at the rifle for a long time, a silent battle playing out in her eyes. It was a compromise, a step across a cultural chasm littered with the bones of her ancestors. Finally, with a stiff, reluctant motion, she took the heavy weapon. It was awkward in her hands, a foreign object of steel and wood. He spent the rest of the afternoon teaching her. He was a patient instructor, his voice low and steady as he showed her how to load, how to sight, how to control her breathing. Her first shot was wild, the powerful kick of the rifle startling her, the roar of it an offense to the canyon silence. But she was a quick study. Her hunter's eye, accustomed to tracking the subtle movements of deer, easily adapted to the rifle's iron sights. By sunset, she was consistently hitting a piece of rusted tin can he had set on a rock 100 yards away. She never smiled, but as she handed the rifle back to him, there was a new light in her eyes. It was the cold, hard glint of power. She had taken a tool of her oppressors and made it her own. The uneasy piece was shattered a week later. Cole was on a high ridge checking the snare line when he saw them 2 riders, etched against the horizon, moving slowly, methodically. They weren't traveling. They were searching. He focused his spyglass on them. The way they rode, the rifles held ready across their saddles, the star-shaped conchos on their bridles recognized it all. Black Creek. Vulture Kane had sent out scouts. He moved quickly, silently, back to the cabin. Ayanna was outside, grinding corn on a flat stone. She saw the look on his face and instantly stood, her hand going to the knife at her belt. To riders, he said, his voice a low growl. Kane's men. They're heading this way. Her face hardened, but there was no fear. How many more will follow? They're scouts. If they don't report back, Kane will send a war party. He grabbed the Winchester and checked its load. I'll handle this. Stay inside. Bar the door. His instinct was to protect, to shield her from the violence he knew so well. But she didn't move. No, she said, her voice firm. This is my home now, too. We will fight for it. She looked up at the steep, rocky walls of the canyon. Their horses make them clumsy here. The canyon is our best weapon. There is a place, up the trail, where the path narrows. The cliff is loose shale. A plan began to form in her eyes, a hunter's strategy. You are one man with a rifle. They will see you and charge. But if the mountain itself attacks them, they will be confused, frightened. Cole listened, his respect for her growing. She wasn't thinking like a victim, waiting to be saved. She was thinking like a strategist, an Apache warrior. A rock slide, he said, understanding dawning in his voice. You will go to the high ledge, above the narrow pass, she instructed, her voice taking on a quiet authority. I will go to the other side of the canyon. When they are in the pass, I will give the call of a hawk. That will be your signal. Fire into the shale, above their heads. The bullets will start the slide. The rocks will do the rest. It was a good plan. A brilliant plan. It used the terrain as a weapon and minimized their own risk. It was also her plan. Trusting it meant trusting her. All right, he said with a decisive nod. Let's give them a welcome. They moved into position, to silent predators preparing an ambush. Cole found his perch, a high, concealed ledge that gave him a perfect view of the narrow trail. He could see Ayanna across the canyon, a small, camouflaged figure melting into the rocks. He chambered around and waited. An hour later, the two riders entered the canyon. They moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the terrain. They were professionals, hard men. Cole recognized one of them, a man named Cletus, known for his skill with a whip. A cold fury settled over Cole. The riders reached the narrow pass. The trap was set. Cole raised the Winchester, waiting for the signal. A perfect, piercing cry of a red-tailed hawk echoed through the canyon. Cole didn't hesitate. He didn't aim for the men. He aimed for the loose scree on the cliff face above them. He fired, the report of the rifle deafening. He worked the lever action, firing again and again, pumping bullets into the unstable rock. At first, nothing happened. Then a few pebbles skittered down. Then a larger rock. And then, with a low, terrifying groan, half the cliff face gave way. A river of rock and dust cascaded down into the pass. The riders yelled in panic, trying to turn their terrified horses. But it was too late. The rock slide hit them like a tidal wave. One man and his horse were swept away instantly, buried under tons of rock. Cletus was thrown from his saddle, his leg crushed by a falling boulder. He lay in the dust, screaming. Cole sighted on him. It would be a mercy to end it. He hesitated. He had come to the desert to stop this, to stop the killing. The decision was taken from him. From across the canyon, there was a soft thrum. An arrow, silent and swift, flew across the pass and buried itself in Cletus's throat. His screams were cut off, replaced by a choked gurgle. He collapsed into the dust, still. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by the settling of the rocks. Cole lowered his rifle, his knuckles white. He looked across the canyon. Ayanna was standing, her new bow held in her hand. She met his gaze, her expression grim, resolute. She had not waited for him to act. She had delivered the killing blow herself, cleanly and without hesitation. She had ended the man's suffering, but it was also an execution, an act of war. They met back at the cabin as twilight fell. The bodies were buried under the rock slide, but the violence of the day hung in the air between them. They had fought together. They had killed together. The fragile truce had been forged into something harder, something more dangerous, a partnership. They will know we are here now, Ayanna said, her voice quiet. I know, Cole replied, cleaning the Winchester. This was just the beginning. He looked at her, at the bow resting against the wall, at the quiet, deadly confidence in her eyes. He had bought a victim at an auction, a woman to be saved. But that woman was gone, if she had ever existed at all. In her place stood a warrior. And Cole Dawson, the man who wanted to be left alone, realized with a grim certainty that he was no longer fighting his own private war. He was now a soldier in hers. The rock slide was a tombstone, marking the end of the canyon's peace. The silence that followed was not one of tranquility, but of anticipation. They had bloody hands now, a shared secret buried under a pile of shale. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. Every shadow seemed to hold the shape of a man. Cole inspected the dead scout's belongings, which he had retrieved before the final rocks had settled. He found what he was looking for, and what he dreaded. On the saddle horn of Cletus's horse, a small, leather disc, branded with the familiar, hated star of the Black Creek Gang. Silas Kane wasn't just sending outlaws, he was sending his own. This was personal. In the days that followed, a change came over Cole. The quiet homesteader retreated, and the outlaw he had tried to bury began to surface. His movements became more economical, his eyes harder. He was a predator again, and his territory had been invaded. He began to turn the canyon into a fortress. The main trail is a death trap now, he explained to Ayanna, his voice the low, rough growl of the man he used to be. He pointed to the high ridges. But they can come over the top. We need to be ready. He spent his days in a fever of grim preparation. He showed Ayanna how to build deadfalls, balanced precariously over the narrow game trails that led into the canyon. He fashioned snares that could pull a man from his saddle. He created a system of warning signal spiles of stones that, when knocked over, would create a clatter that would echo through the canyon. He was turning their home into a web of traps, a maze designed to kill. Ayanna watched him, her expression a mixture of respect and a deep, ingrained wariness. She saw the lethal efficiency in his work, the cold, practical knowledge of a man who had spent his life dealing in violence. She was seeing the ghost from the campfire stories, the man who had faced down 6 rangers. And a part of her wondered if he was truly any different from the men who were hunting them. One evening, as he sat oiling the action of his peacemaker, she finally asked the question that had been hanging between them. "This star," she said, her voice quiet, gesturing toward the scar on his hand. "Kane has it. The men in the canyon had it. You have it. What does it mean?" Cole stopped his work. He stared at the scar as if seeing it for the first time. For 8 years, it had been a mark of shame, a brand of his past failures. "It means you were part of the family," he said, the words tasting like rust. "The Black Creek Bunch. It meant loyalty. It meant you had a place." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "It meant you bled for them, and they'd bleed for you. Or so I thought." He hesitated, then continued, the story spilling out of him as if a dam had finally broken. The leader, the man who started it all, was an old outlaw named Elias Thorne. He wasn't a good man, but he had a code. "We robbed trains and banks, not people. We didn't kill unless we had to." Kane, he was different. He was greedy, vicious. He saw the gang not as a family, but as a tool. He looked up, his eyes locking with hers, a haunted look in their icy depths. "Thorne had a daughter, Lily. She and we were going to leave that life. Head for Oregon." Kane found out. He saw it as a betrayal. He saw me as a threat to his ambition to take over the gang. He took a deep breath, the memory still raw. He arranged a job, a simple payroll robbery, but it was a trap. He tipped off the rangers. In the chaos, he didn't come for me. He went for Lily. Cole's hand clenched into a fist, the scar stretching taut. He killed her. Said it was my fault, for making the gang weak, for turning my back on them. He held me down while his men burned this star into my hand, so I'd never forget the price of disloyalty. Then they left me for dead." He fell silent. The fire crackled, filling the void. He had never told another living soul that story. He had carried it alone, a poison in his heart. Ayanna listened without a word, her dark eyes filled with a profound, ancient sorrow. She understood the language of loss. She knew what it was to have your world burned to the ground by the greed of others. She reached out, not to touch him, but in a small, hesitant gesture of solidarity. "My family was killed by soldiers," she said softly. "They wanted the land because it had yellow iron in it. They did not see us as people. They saw us as weeds in their garden." In that moment, they were no longer a white outlaw and an Apache woman. They were just 2 survivors, 2 people whose lives had been irrevocably shaped by violence, finding a strange, bitter kinship in their shared ghosts. The wariness in her eyes was replaced by a fierce, protective understanding. Cole was not like Cain. He was a man who had been broken by the same kind of evil that had shattered her own life. The attack came 3 days later, at dawn. It was not a stealthy infiltration. It was a full-blown assault. Silas Cain, enraged by the loss of his scouts, had brought 15 men. They stormed the main entrance to the canyon, whooping and firing their guns, expecting to flush out a single, cornered man. They were met not with fear, but with a carefully prepared defense. The first 3 riders galloped straight into a tripwire, releasing a massive log that swung down from the canyon wall, sweeping them and their horses from the path in a tangle of broken bones. The rest of the gang faltered, their charge breaking into a confused mess. From his perch high above, Cole opened fire with the Winchester, his shots methodical and deadly. He wasn't the man who had hesitated to shoot the injured scout. He was Cole Dawson of the Black Creek Bunch, and he was defending his home. Each lever action was a punctuation mark in a sentence of death. A man fell from his saddle. Another clutched his chest and toppled. Ayanna was on the other side of the canyon, just as they had planned. She wasn't using the rifle. She was using her bow. Her arrows were silent messengers, appearing from nowhere, finding gaps in the Outlaws' cover. A man peering around a rock suddenly grunted and fell forward, a feathered shaft protruding from his neck. The canyon had become a crossfire, a perfectly designed kill box. Cain's men, accustomed to being the predators, were now trapped, being picked apart from two sides by an enemy they could barely see. "Spread out. Get up the damn rocks," Cain bellowed, his face purple with rage. He and a handful of men broke from the main group, scrambling up the steep slope toward Cole's position. "They're coming for you," Ayanna's voice, a clear, sharp cry, carried across the canyon. "Hold your position," Cole yelled back. He abandoned the Winchester and drew his peacemaker. This was about to become close quarters work. He let them come, waiting until they were scrambling over the rocks just below his ledge. Then he rose, a grim specter of vengeance, and began to fire. The peacemaker bucked in his hand, its roar echoing off the stone. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, each shot placed with a gunman's cold precision. A man screamed and fell backward. Another tumbled down the rocks. But there were too many. One of them, a big, burly outlaw, managed to heave himself onto the ledge. He lunged at Cole, a knife flashing in his hand. Cole met his charge, blocking the knife with his forearm. The 2 men grappled on the narrow ledge, a desperate, grunting struggle. Below, Ayanna saw Cole was in trouble. The remaining outlaws on the canyon floor were now firing up at her, pinning her down. She had a choice: stay in cover, or risk everything for her partner. She didn't hesitate. She broke cover, sprinting across a short, exposed patch of ground to get a better angle. A bullet sang past her head, kicking up a spray of dirt. She ignored it. She drew her bow, nocked an arrow, and fired, all in one fluid motion. On the ledge, the big outlaw had just raised his knife for a killing blow when the arrow took him in the side, just under his arm. It wasn't a fatal shot, but the shock and pain made him cry out and stumble. That was all the opening Cole needed. He slammed the barrel of his pistol against the man's temple and shoved him off the ledge. The remaining attackers, seeing their leaderless comrades being slaughtered, lost their nerve. Led by a furious Silas Cain, they retreated, dragging their wounded with them, leaving 7 of their dead behind in the canyon. As the sound of their horses faded, a profound silence fell. Cole stood on the ledge, breathing heavily, his arm bleeding where the knife had grazed it. He looked across the canyon. Ayanna stood there, her bow in her hand, her chest rising and falling. Their eyes met across the space that separated them, a space littered with the bodies of their enemies. The sanctuary was safe, for now. But it was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. They had won, but they both knew Cain would be back, and next time, he would bring an army. They couldn't stay. That night, they buried the dead. They worked in silence, a grim, shared task. As they stood over the last rough grave, Cole knew what he had to do. "We leave at dawn," he said. Ayanna just nodded. "Where will we go?" Cole looked out from the mouth of the canyon, into the vast and forgiving desert that stretched to the horizon. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we can't stay here. We're not hiding anymore, Ayanna. From now on, we're running." The shadow of the vulture had fallen over their sanctuary, and they were forced to flee into the open, to fugitives with a shared past and an uncertain future. hunted by a man who would not stop until they were both dead. Leaving the canyon was like tearing a piece of his own flesh. For 8 years, it had been the only place in the world where Cole Dawson felt he could breathe. Now, as they rode east into the rising sun, he could feel the phantom weight of the world settling back onto his shoulders. He was no longer a hermit. He was a man on the run, with a target on his back and a woman to protect. They rode hard for 2 days, pushing their horses through the brutal, sun-baked Badlands. This was a land of mirages and stark beauty, a place that could kill a careless man in hours. They spoke little, the urgency of their flight a silent conversation between them. Cole pushed them relentlessly, his knowledge of the outlaw trails giving them a path, while Ayana's instincts guided them to hidden springs and sheltered arroyos where they could make cold, smokeless camps. They were a strange, efficient team, her deep knowledge of the land meshing perfectly with his hard-won knowledge of the men who hunted them. On the 3rd night, as they rested the horses in a shallow cave, Ayana tended to the gash on Cole's forearm. The wound was inflamed, a red and angry reminder of their battle. She crushed some herbs she had gathered, mixing them with a little water to form a paste, and applied it to the cut. The poultice was cool and soothing. "You fight like a demon," she said quietly, her fingers gentle as she wrapped the wound with a clean strip of cloth. "But you are still made of flesh and blood." "Cain's men are the same," Cole grunted, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "They bleed. They die. There are just more of them." "He will not stop," she stated. It wasn't a question. "No," Cole agreed. "This isn't about you anymore." "Not really. When I left the Black Creek Bunch, I broke their code. When I stood against him in redemption, I challenged his authority. Now, by killing his men, I've made him look weak. He can't let that stand. He'll hunt us to the gates of hell." They were no longer just running. They were being actively pursued. The next day, Cole saw the proof. From a high mesa, he watched their back trail through his spyglass. Far in the distance, a plume of dust rose against the blue sky. A large group of riders. At least 20. "They're on our trail," he said, his voice grim. "And they're gaining." Ayana looked at the dust cloud, then at the exhausted state of their horses. "We cannot outrun them." "No," Cole said. "So we have to be smarter." His eyes took on a calculating glint. He was back in his element now, the grim chess game of pursuit and evasion. "We need to leave a trail of ghosts." He explained his plan. They wouldn't try to hide their tracks. They would create false ones. They would lead their pursuers on a deadly chase through the most inhospitable terrain imaginable, a place the locals called the Devil's Anvil. It was a labyrinth of canyons, sun-scorched flats, and dry riverbeds, a place where water was a memory and every rock shimmered with heat. "They think they're hunting to people," Cole said, a cold smile touching his lips. "We'll make them think they're hunting an army." For the next 4 days, they played a desperate, brilliant game. They would ride into a canyon, then spend hours carefully brushing away their tracks and backtracking, making it look as though a large party had ridden in and simply vanished. They tied bundles of sagebrush to ropes and dragged them behind their horses, creating huge dust signatures that would lead Cain's men toward box canyons with no water. Ayana's skills were indispensable. She could find game trails that were invisible to Cole's eyes, allowing them to traverse ridges that seemed impassable. She showed him how to use the wind to carry their scent away from their true path. She was a ghost in her own right, a creature of the earth, and she taught him how to be one too. In turn, he taught her the art of the outlaw's misdirection. He'd fire a single shot from a canyon rim, the sound echoing and distorting, making it impossible to pinpoint the source, sending the posse on a wild goose chase. He'd leave behind a carefully placed, empty water skin, a small offering of false hope that would lure them deeper into the arid wasteland. They were a two-person phantom menace, constantly on the move, sleeping in short, exhausted bursts, their senses honed to a razor's edge. The shared hardship and constant danger forged their bond into something unbreakable. They learned to communicate with a glance, a subtle hand signal. They moved as one entity, their survival completely dependent on each other. But the Devil's Anvil exacted a price. Their water ran low. Their horses grew gaunt and weak. The relentless sun beat down on them, and the landscape offered no shade, no respite. One afternoon Cole, dizzy from the heat, stumbled and fell. He tried to get up, but the world was a spinning, shimmering blur. Ayana was instantly at his side. She pressed her canteen to his lips. It was nearly empty. "We must find water," she said, her own voice raspy. She scanned the horizon, her eyes narrowed. She saw nothing but baked earth and shimmering rock. But then her gaze fell to the ground. She knelt, examining the flight path of a series of tiny gnats. She pointed to a sheer rock face a half-mile away. "There," she said. "The insects know." Cole could see nothing, but he trusted her. He leaned on her, and together they staggered toward the rock wall. As they got closer, he saw a dark, weeping stain on the rock, hidden in a deep fissure. A seep. It wasn't a spring, just a slow, steady drip of water, filtered through the rock, collecting in a small, shallow basin. It was a miracle. They drank deeply, letting the cool, clean water wash the dust from their throats and revive their spirits. They had survived. As they rested in the sliver of shade offered by the cliff, they saw the dust cloud of their pursuers again. But it was different now. It was smaller, and it was no longer following their false trail. It was heading straight for them. "They have a scout," Ayanna said, her voice flat. "An Apache scout. He can read our true signs." Cole cursed under his breath. He had counted on their ignorance of the land. A native tracker changed the entire game. The chase was over. Now, the fight would begin. "We can't fight 20 men in the open," Cole said, his mind racing. He looked at their surroundings. They were trapped against the cliff face, with a wide, open plain in front of them. It was a terrible place to make a stand. Then his eyes fell upon a series of weathered, ancient rock formations a few miles to the north. They looked like the skeletal fingers of a buried giant reaching from the earth, a maze of narrow passages, high spires, and natural stone arches. A place of ambush and cover. "The hoodoos," he said. "If we can make it there, we can even the odds." It was a desperate gamble. They would have to make a mad dash across the open ground, in full view of their pursuers. "They will run us down," Ayanna stated, her hand resting on her bow. "Not if we give them something else to chase," Cole said. A grim, desperate plan formed in his mind. He looked at their 2 horses. They were loyal, tough animals, but they were on their last legs. They wouldn't both make it. He made a decision that felt like a betrayal. He took his own horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had carried him for 5 years, and slapped it hard on the rump, sending it galloping off in the opposite direction. Then he fired a shot into the air. Miles away, the posse saw the lone horse and heard the shot. They would assume their quarry was trying to create a diversion, sending a pack horse off while they fled on the stronger animal. They would split their forces. "It will buy us time," Cole said, his voice rough. He turned to Ayanna and their remaining horse. "Let's ride." They mounted up, Cole swinging up behind Ayanna, and urged the tired animal into a gallop. They raced across the open plain, a single, desperate entity fleeing towards the skeletal fingers of the hoodoos. Behind them, the dust cloud of Silas Kane's posse grew larger and larger, a storm of vengeance about to break over their heads. They had left a trail of ghosts, but now their own ghosts were catching up. The ride to the hoodoos was a desperate, lung-searing sprint for survival. The lone horse, carrying double, strained with every stride, its breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Behind them, the posse closed the distance with terrifying speed, their triumphant yells carrying on the hot wind. Bullets began to whine past them, kicking up angry spurts of dust. "Faster," Cole urged, his arm tight around Ayanna's waist, his peacemaker in his hand, firing back over his shoulder to discourage their pursuers. They reached the edge of the rock formations just as their horse stumbled, its legs finally giving out. The animal went down, sending them sprawling into the red dirt. They scrambled to their feet and ran, diving into the labyrinth of twisted rock just as the posse descended upon them. They were afoot, trapped in a maze of stone, with a small army of angry men sealing the only exit. "This is it, then," Ayanna said, her voice steady as she nocked an arrow. She showed no fear, only a calm, fatalistic resolve. "Not yet," Cole growled. He pulled her behind a massive sandstone pillar. "This is their kind of fight. Guns and numbers. We need to make it ours." He knew they couldn't win a prolonged siege. They had limited ammunition and even less water. Their only chance was to be the predators in this maze, not the prey. For the next few hours, they waged a guerrilla war. They would strike from the shadows and vanish back into the rock. Ayanna was in her element, her silent movements and keen eyes allowing her to appear as if from the stone itself. An arrow would fly from a high ledge, taking a man out of his saddle. Cole, using his knowledge of ricochets, would fire a bullet into a narrow canyon, the slug bouncing off the walls, creating chaos and confusion. They were two ghosts against 20 men, and for a time, they held their own, the posse's superior numbers negated by the confusing terrain and their own growing fear. Kane's men began to see enemies in every shadow, their confidence eroding with every man who fell to an unseen attacker. But Silas Kane was not a man to be deterred by fear. He was consumed by a cold, obsessive rage. He ordered his men to dismount and spread out, to sweep the hoodoos methodically. He was tightening the net. Cole and Ayanna found temporary refuge in a high, defensible crevice that offered a commanding view of the surrounding area. They watched as Kane's men began their systematic search. "They'll find us by sundown," Cole said, his voice grim as he counted his remaining cartridges. He had 6 for his rifle, 9 for his pistol. Ayanna had 5 arrows left. He looked at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her lips cracked from thirst, but her eyes were bright and defiant. In the heat of battle, she was magnificent, a warrior queen in her desolate kingdom of stone. And a sudden, fierce, and utterly inconvenient wave of feeling washed over him. It wasn't just responsibility or partnership. It was something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Lily. And it terrified him more than all of Kane's men combined. That feeling solidified his decision. He had dragged her into this. His past, his fight. There was one last card he could play, one final act of misdirection. "Ayanna," he said, his voice quiet and serious. "There's a way out. For you." She looked at him, her eyes questioning. "On the north side of these rocks, there's a wash that leads out to the flats," he explained. "It's the one way they won't be watching, because it leads to nowhere. To the deep desert. They think we're trapped here. I'm going to give them what they want. I'll lead them on a chase, back south. It will be loud. It will be messy. It will draw every man here. While they're chasing me, you slip out through the wash. You head north. Don't stop. You can survive out there. You can find your way." He was offering her an escape. He was offering to sacrifice himself to buy her freedom. It was his final attempt to return to his solitude, to pay his penance alone. Ayanna stared at him for a long, silent moment. She understood perfectly what he was suggesting. He was trying to put her back in a cage of safety, built with his own life. He was still trying to save her. Her expression hardened. "You think my life is yours to spend?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "I think you deserve to live," he countered. "This is my fight, my ghost. You don't have to die for it." "You are a fool, Cole Dawson," she said, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "You think I am the same woman you saw on that stage, a victim to be rescued. I have fought beside you. I have killed beside you. These men hunt me as much as they hunt you. My freedom is not something you can give me. It is something I take for myself. And I will not take it by running while my partner dies." She took a step closer, her face inches from his. "My people have a saying. It is better to die on your feet than live on your knees. I will not run. We fight. Together. Or we die. Together. That is my choice." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. In his attempt to protect her, he had insulted her, denied her agency, the very thing she had fought so hard to reclaim. He had seen her as a warrior, but in the final moment, he had reverted to seeing her as a woman who needed saving. He was wrong. She was not a liability to be protected. She was his partner, his equal. A slow smile touched Cole's lips. It was a real smile this time, free of bitterness and pain. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated respect. "All right, warrior," he said, his voice filled with a new warmth. Together. The choice had been made. There would be no more running, no more sacrifice. They were no longer two fugitives. They were a line drawn in the dust, a final stand. "So," he said, the outlaw mind fully taking over, a plan beginning to form. "If we're not running, we'd better give them a fight they'll never forget." He looked around their stone fortress, at the setting sun that was casting long, dramatic shadows. "Kane wants a final battle," Cole said, a deadly glint in his eye. "He thinks he has us trapped. He's right. He's got us exactly where we want him." The internal battle was over. Cole Dawson had finally stopped running from the man he was. He was an outlaw, a killer. But now, he had a reason to be. He had a partner to fight for. And as the sun went down, casting the hoodoos in blood-red light, they began to prepare the trap that would either save them or be their tomb. With the decision to stand and fight came a radical shift in the air between them. The desperate tension of the hunted was replaced by the cold, focused calm of the hunter. They were no longer prey. They were bait, and they were about to set their own trap. As darkness fell, blanketing the hoodoos in a cool, star-dusted shroud, their stone crevice became a war room. The landscape that had been their prison was now their chessboard. Cain is arrogant, Cole began, sketching a rough map in the dirt with the tip of his knife. He thinks he's won. He'll wait until morning to make his final push. He wants to see our faces when he does it. This pause, this overconfidence, was the weakness they had to exploit. He will send his Apache scout in first, at dawn, Ayanna added, her voice a low murmur, to find our exact position. The others will follow the scout's lead. Then the scout is our first target, Cole agreed. But not to kill him. We need him. Their plan was audacious, born of a desperate fusion of their two worlds. It would not be a simple shootout. It would be a battle of deception, of psychological warfare, using the terrain and the enemy's own expectations against them. We need to separate Cain from his men, Cole continued, drawing a line on his dirt map. And we need to even the odds. We're 2 guns and a bow against what, 15 now. Their first task was to build their arsenal. Their ammunition was nearly gone, but the hoodoos offered other weapons. Under Ayanna's guidance, they spent the first hours of the night creating tools of a more ancient and subtle warfare. She showed Cole how to find a particular type of rock that, when struck, would shatter into razor-sharp shards. They gathered these, wrapping the bases in strips of leather from Cole's saddlebags to make crude, effective knives. She found a vine, tough and pliable as leather, and taught him how to weave it into a simple but strong tripwire. Her greatest contribution, however, came from her knowledge of the desert's flora. She found a patch of dried, unassuming weeds. Loco weed, she explained. When it burns, the smoke makes the mind sick. Men see things that are not there. They become afraid of their own shadows. They gathered armfuls of it, bundling it into small packets with twine. This would be their secret weapon, a way to attack the enemy's minds before they attack their bodies. While Ayanna gathered the elements of the earth, Cole worked with the elements of his own past. He took his remaining rifle cartridges and, with painstaking care, pried the bullets from the casings. He emptied half the gunpowder from each, reducing their power and range, but doubling his number of shots. They wouldn't be lethal at a distance, but they would be loud. They were no longer for killing. They were for making noise, for hurting the enemy. He saved 2 full-power rifle cartridges and 5 pistol rounds. These were his killing bullets, to be used only when the time was right. Their masterpiece was the trap for the scout. They found a narrow, game trail that led up to their position, a path a cautious man would take. A few feet up the trail, Ayanna positioned a snare, a loop of tough vine connected to a heavy rock, designed not to kill, but to trap a man's leg. Just beyond the snare, Cole constructed a more brutal deterrent. He found a large, flat boulder and, using smaller rocks as a fulcrum, balanced it precariously on the edge of the trail. A single, well-placed support stone held it in place. The tripwire Ayanna had made was tied to this support stone and stretched taut across the path, just inches off the ground. The scout will see the snare, Cole explained, his voice a low whisper in the dark. He'll be looking for it. He'll step over it. But he won't be looking for the second trap. Their plan was to capture the scout, force him to give them information about Cain's plans, and then use him. As the moon climbed high in the sky, they finished their work. The hoodoos were no longer just a rock formation. They were a weapon, armed and waiting. They retreated to their crevice, not to sleep, but to wait. You have done this before, Ayanna said, watching Cole as he methodically checked the action on his pistol. His movements economical and precise. This planning. This war. Too many times, Cole said, not looking up. But I was always fighting for the wrong reasons. For money. For a misplaced sense of loyalty. For nothing. He finally met her gaze, his own eyes reflecting the cold starlight. This time is different. This time, I know what I'm fighting for. He was fighting for the flicker of peace he had found in the canyon. He was fighting for the woman who had shown him that honor was not about the absence of violence, but about the reason for it. He was fighting for the chance at a dawn that wasn't a maybe. Ayanna simply nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. She took one of her 5 remaining arrows and began to carefully apply a dark paste to its tip. It was a poison, drawn from a scorpion's tail, potent enough to paralyze, to kill. She was saving it for a special target. They sat in silence for the remainder of the night, a warrior and an outlaw, 2 sides of the same coin, waiting for the sun. The air was cold and still. In the distance, they could see the faint glow of the Pas's campfire, a lone orange eye in the vast darkness. It was the eye of the beast, and at dawn, they would attempt to blind it. Their arsenal was forged. Their plan was set. They had no illusions about their chances. But as they sat there, shoulder to shoulder in the darkness, they were not afraid. For the first time in either of their lives, they were not alone in the fight. And that, they knew, made them more dangerous than Silas King could possibly imagine. Dawn broke not as a gentle glow, but as a sharp, bloody crack across the horizon. The first rays of light painted the hoodoos in stark relief, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed like living things. It was a perfect stage for the day's grim theater. From their perch, Cole and Ayanna watched the enemy camp stir to life. They saw Silas Kane emerge from his tent, his silhouette thick with impatience and rage. He gathered his men, his voice a distant, angry bark on the wind. As Ayanna had predicted, one man detached himself from the group and began to move toward the hoodoos alone. He was Apache, that much was clear from his fluid, ground-eating stride and the way he blended with the terrain. He carried a Winchester, but moved with the ancient caution of his people, his eyes constantly scanning, reading the story of the land. "He's good," Cole whispered, watching the scout through his spyglass. "He is a traitor," Ayanna replied, her voice cold as stone. "He hunts his own kind for the white man's silver." They watched as the scout found their trail from the day before. He followed it, moving with a silent, relentless purpose, directly toward the narrow game trail where their trap was laid. He entered the passage, his body tensing, his senses on high alert. He saw the snare. Just as Cole had predicted, his eyes, trained to look for such things, spotted the loop of vine on the ground. He paused, a faint, contemptuous smile touching his lips. He saw it as an amateurish attempt, easily avoided. He carefully stepped over it, his focus on the ground. He never saw the second tripwire, stretched taut at ankle height just beyond it. His foot caught the wire. The support stone was yanked away. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the massive, balanced boulder tipped and fell, crashing onto the trail with the force of a cannonball, completely blocking the path behind him. He was trapped. Before he could even turn, Cole was on him. He descended from the rocks above like an avalanche, his pistol in hand. At the same time, Ayanna appeared from the shadows in front of him, her knife a glimmer of deadly intent. The scout was caught between them, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He dropped his rifle without a word. "We have questions," Cole said, his voice a low growl. "You'll answer them, or we'll leave you here for the buzzards." The scout, a man named Taza, was a pragmatist. He had sold his loyalty once. He was not about to die for it. Faced with the grim finality of his situation, he talked. He told them Kane's plan, a 3-pronged assault, designed to pin them down and overwhelm them with sheer numbers. He told them about the new reward Kane was offering, $1,000 in gold, for their heads. "He wants you alive, Dawson," Taza sneered. "Especially you. He has plans for you." When they had all the information they needed, Ayanna looked at Cole. Her eyes were cold. Taza was a traitor. The law of the desert was clear. But Cole shook his head slightly. "We need him," he mouthed. He turned back to Taza. "Here's what's going to happen," Cole said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're going to go back down there. You're going to tell Kane that you found us. You'll say we're holed up at the far eastern end of the hoodoos, in the place they call the Sunken Cavern. You'll tell him we're low on water and ammunition, ready to be taken. You will lead him, and the main body of his men, into that cavern." Taza looked at him as if he were insane. "He'll kill me." "I'll kill you right now if you don't," Cole countered, pressing the muzzle of the peacemaker against Taza's temple. "You lead him there, and when this is over, if you're still alive, you ride north, and you never come back. Understand?" Taza, seeing his own survival as the only viable option, gave a curt, resentful nod. "Good," Cole said. He then did something unexpected. He took his knife and made a shallow, clean cut across Taz's arm. "So your story is believable." They sent the scout on his way, a bleeding and willing Judas. They watched as he scrambled down the rocks and reported to Cain. They saw Cain clap him on the shoulder, then turn and bark orders. The posse began to move, the largest group following Taza toward the sunken cavern, a natural dead end at the opposite side of the rock formation. A smaller group of 5 men was dispatched to circle around and guard the western exit, just in case. "He took the bait," Ayanna breathed. "He's arrogant," Cole said, "and he wants this over. Now, we go to work." Their plan was now in motion. While the bulk of Cain's men were being led on a wild goose chase, Cole and Ayanna would deal with the 5 men guarding the western flank. They moved through the hoodoos like ghosts, using passages and tunnels that only Ayanna's keen eyes could spot. They circled around behind the 5 men, who had taken up a lazy watch, confident that the action was on the other side. "This is my fight," Ayanna whispered, her hand on her bow. "The smoke." Cole nodded. He understood. This was not about bullets. This was about fear. Ayanna crept forward, a shadow among the rocks. She found a spot upwind from the guard's position. She took out the bundles of dried loco weed and, using a flint and steel, set them smoldering. The thick, acrid smoke carried directly toward the unsuspecting men. Cole watched from a distance, his rifle ready. At first, nothing happened. Then one of the men coughed. Another complained about the strange-smelling smoke. After a few minutes, the real effects began. One of the men suddenly jumped up, his eyes wide, and pointed at a rock. "Did you see that?" he yelled. "It moved." Another began to laugh for no reason, a high-pitched, giggling sound that quickly turned into a sob. A third drew his pistol and began firing at shadows, the bullets ricocheting wildly. Their minds were unraveling. They were trapped in their own private hells, their worst fears made manifest by the hallucinogenic smoke. This was Ayanna's vengeance. She was not just killing her enemies, she was showing them the terror of a mind turned against itself. She was repaying the psychological torment her people had suffered tenfold. While the guards were lost in their madness, Cole and Ayanna slipped past them, as silent as the wind. They had neutralized the western guard without firing a single lethal shot. Now, only one target remained, Silas Cain himself, who was leading the main force into the sunken cavern. "It's time," Cole said, his face a grim mask. They moved back through the labyrinth, this time toward the trap they had prepared for the vulture. The whispers they had sent on the wind had done their work. The stage was set for the final, bloody act. The beast had walked into their cave, and now, they were going to seal the entrance. The sunken cavern was a natural amphitheater of stone, a wide, sandy basin surrounded by sheer cliffs with only one narrow entrance. It was a perfect trap. As Silas Cain and his 12 remaining men rode into it, their confidence was absolute. They were conquerors, come to claim their prize. From a high, hidden ledge overlooking the entrance, Cole and Ayanna watched them enter. They had Taza, the scout, to thank. He had led the wolf pack into the pen. "They're all in," Ayanna whispered, her hand resting on the string of her bow. This was the arrow she had saved, the poisoned one. "Not yet," Cole breathed, his eyes on the narrow entrance. "Wait for my signal." Cain's men fanned out in the cavern, their rifles ready, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of their quarry. Cain himself sat on his horse in the center, a smug, triumphant look on his face. "All right, Dawson," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the rock walls. "The game is over. Come on out, and I might let the squaw live." There was no answer but the wind. Cain's smirk began to falter, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He motioned for Taza. "Are you sure this is the place?" Before the scout could answer, Cole gave his signal. He rose from his hiding place and fired one of his half-loaded rifle rounds, not at Cain, but at a precariously balanced rock formation high above the cavern's entrance. The bullet struck with a loud crack, and the formation, weakened by centuries of erosion, shattered. A cascade of rock and dust poured down, completely blocking the narrow entrance. The boom of the rock slide echoed like a closing tomb door. Cain and his men were sealed in. Panic erupted. The outlaws spun their horses around, firing wildly at the blocked entrance, their arrogance turning to instant, claustrophobic fear. "It's a trap," One of them screamed. From the ledge, Cole began to fire his remaining noise rounds, the bullets striking the cliff walls around the cavern. The reports echoing and multiplying until it sounded like they were surrounded by a dozen riflemen. At the same time, Ayanna began to throw the last of the smoldering loco weed bundles down into the basin. The cavern filled with smoke and the deafening roar of gunfire. Men yelled in confusion, their horses screaming and rearing. It was chaos, magnified by the enclosed space and the mind-altering smoke. This was their chance. Now, Cole yelled. They descended from the ledge, using a hidden path, and entered the cavern through a small fissure Kane's men had never seen. They were inside the tomb with their enemies. They moved through the smoke and confusion like wraiths. This was no longer a battle of guns, it was a close, brutal, and personal affair. Cole used his last 5 pistol rounds with deadly precision, taking down the men closest to him. When his gun was empty, he drew the bowie knife Ayanna had returned to him. He was a whirlwind of violence, the ghost of Black Creek made flesh, his knife a silver blur in the choking smoke. Ayanna was a silent angel of death on the other side of the cavern. Her bow sang its deadly song 3 times, each arrow finding its mark. When her arrows were gone, she used the sharp, stone knives they had made, striking from the shadows, her movements swift and silent. Kane's men, already terrified and disoriented by the smoke, were being slaughtered. They were fighting shadows, swinging at ghosts, their numbers dwindling with every passing second. Finally, only Silas Kane was left. He stood in the center of the cavern, surrounded by his dead and dying men, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. Through a swirl of smoke, he saw Cole approaching, knife in hand. "Dawson," he roared, raising his own pistol. He fired, the shot going wide as Cole lunged to the side. Before Kane could fire again, an arrow struck his gun hand, the poison tip sinking deep into his wrist. He screamed, not in pain, but in shock, as his fingers went numb and his pistol clattered to the ground. He looked up and saw Ayanna, her bow held steady, her eyes as cold and hard as obsidian. Kane was disarmed, his men were dead, and he was trapped between the 2 people he had wronged so deeply. Cole advanced on him slowly, the knife held low. "This is for Lily," he said, his voice a low, guttural growl. She was weak, Kane spat, defiance still burning in his eyes. "Just like you. You turned your back on the family. You were never family, Kane," Cole said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You were just a snake in the nest." Kane, in a final act of desperation, lunged, pulling a hidden knife from his boot. But he was clumsy, his right arm already heavy and useless from the poison. Cole met his charge easily, parrying the thrust. The 2 men grappled, a final, grunting dance of death among the bodies of their past. Cole was stronger, faster. He twisted the knife from Kane's grasp and spun him around, holding the blade to his throat. "It's over, Silas," Cole breathed. He looked over Kane's shoulder and saw Ayanna. Her face was grim, but she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. This was his ghost to bury. With a final, clean motion, Cole ended the life of Silas Vulture Kane. He let the body fall to the dusty floor of the cavern. Silence. The smoke began to clear, revealing the true carnage. The battle was over. The war was won. Cole stood there, breathing heavily, the bloody knife in his hand. Ayanna walked to his side. She looked at the dead men, then at him. She reached out and gently took the knife from his hand, wiping the blade clean on a piece of cloth before tucking it back into his sheath. It was a simple, profound gesture. A cleansing. They were alive. They were free. But as they looked around the smoke-filled cavern, a makeshift tomb for a dozen men, they knew the ghosts of this day would follow them forever. They had paid the devil his due, and the price had been paid in blood. The air in the sunken cavern was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the lingering, acrid scent of the loco weed. The battle was over, but its echoes remained, a low hum in the sudden, profound silence. Cole and Ayanna stood in the midst of the carnage, 2 survivors in a boneyard of their own making. The fire of vengeance had burned hot and bright, and now, in its aftermath, they were left with only the embers. Cole looked at the body of Silas Kane, a man who had haunted his every waking moment for 8 long years. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a vast, hollow emptiness. Killing Kane hadn't erased the past. It hadn't brought Lily back. It had just put a final, bloody period at the end of a terrible chapter. Ayanna, ever practical, broke the silence. "We must leave this place," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The scout Taza, he will talk. Others will come." She was right. They had won their war, but the world was still full of men who would hunt them for the price on their heads. They were free from Cain, but they were not yet free from the world he represented. They gathered what they could from the dead men, the pistols with ammunition, a canteen of water, a pouch of gold coins from Cain's own belt. They found Taz's horse, which had been left tethered outside the trap, and mounted up. They did not look back as they rode away from the sunken cavern, leaving the dead to be judged by the sun and the scavengers. They rode west, away from redemption, away from the blood-soaked ground of their final battle. They rode in a comfortable silence, no longer needing words to communicate. The horrors they had shared had forged a bond between them that was deeper than language, a silent understanding of the scars they both carried, seen and unseen. After 2 days of riding, they found themselves in a high, green valley, a hidden oasis of cottonwood trees and a clear, running stream. It was a place of impossible peace, a world away from the harsh desert they had just escaped. Here, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they stopped running. They made a camp by the stream. For the first time, they built a proper fire, its warmth and light a comfort rather than a risk. As Ayanna tended to the horse, Cole sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He took the star-branded leather disc from his pocket, the one he had taken from the first scout in the canyon. He looked at it for a long time, at the symbol of loyalty that had become a symbol of his pain. Then, with a final, decisive motion, he tossed it into the heart of the fire. He watched as the leather curled, blackened, and was consumed by the flames, until nothing was left but ash. Ayanna came and sat beside him, watching the last of the brand disappear. "The ghost is gone," she said softly. "The ghost is gone," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. But he knew it wasn't entirely true. Cain was dead, but the man Cole had been forced to become to defeat him killer. The outlaw was still very much alive. "What now, Cole Dawson?" she asked, looking at him, her dark eyes searching his. It was the question that had been hovering at the edge of his thoughts. He could keep running. He could find another canyon, another place to hide from the world, from himself. Or, he could choose a different path. He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her face, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. He saw the warrior who had fought beside him, the healer who had tended his wounds, the partner who had refused to leave his side. He had started this journey to save her, but in the end, she had been the one to save him. She had reminded him that there were things worth fighting for, that a life lived in hiding was not a life at all. "I'm done running," he said, and the words felt more true than anything he had ever said. "I spent 8 years trying to bury the man I was. But you showed me that maybe he's not the man I need to be ashamed of." He reached out and, for the first time, took her hand. Her hand was strong and calloused, a hand that knew how to work, how to fight, how to survive. It fit perfectly in his. "I don't know what's next," he admitted. "The world is still a dangerous place. But I don't want to face it alone anymore." Ayanna looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. A small, rare smile touched her lips. It was a smile that held the light of a new dawn. "My people did not have a word for alone," she said. "We were always a part of the whole. The tribe, the land. When they were taken from me, I forgot what that felt like." She squeezed his hand. "With you, I remember. They didn't have a map. They didn't have a destination. The world was still full of vultures and ghosts." But as they sat by the fire, under a vast sky full of unfamiliar stars, they had something more important. They had each other. They were two outcasts, a broken outlaw and the last of her tribe, two people the world had tried to discard. But here, in the quiet heart of the wilderness, they had found more than just survival. They had found a tribe of two. And together, they would face the dawn, not as fugitives, but as pioneers of a new, and certain, and shared destiny. The past was a trail of embers behind them, and the future was an open, uncharted territory, waiting for them to make their mark.